Good afternoon, brothers and sisters in Christ. Today I will be sharing with you on the gift of stories and how especially this is relevant in the work at Landings. In a nutshell, Landings is a ministry that welcomes away, or what we call returning Catholics. And a little bit about myself. My name is Leonard, and I was baptized as a child, went through the sacraments, took a little detour in the faith life by pursuing what the world offers. But with a personal crisis, I took the first tentative steps to return back to the faith through the doors of Landings a while back. So storytelling, I would describe myself as a compulsive storyteller. But this can be taken both positively and negatively because storytelling without truth actually is lies. And in another way, you could call me a compulsive liar then. When I was in school, I gathered quite a following, especially in the back of the classrooms telling stories. Yeah? And there's one particular instance that stick to my mind because the audience was so captivated and so enraptured by what I was sharing. I was describing the scenes in my mind, what I thought would be Egypt. I described the sand, I described the granularity and the textures that I felt. I described the colors, the pyramids, the market scene where there was haggling, bargaining, and the colors of the various kind of fruit. But the long story short, I had never been to Egypt. So in other words, these very captured audience were followed through with the beauty and the power of my imagination. So you could see that positively or negatively. But how I would take away from that experience was there was a powerful connection in using stories to get in touch with others. And this could be used in a good way or in a bad way. In this particular case, maybe not so positive in terms of the intention. Our sharing today will be in 3 simple bite sizes. I call them reality, relevance, and resolution. The reality of our life today, the context and situations and the distractions that all of us face. The relevance of how stories could actually be used to actually help us take ourselves away from those distractions that compete with the space for God in our hearts. And finally, resolution. What do we take away from today? If you know that there's a power and a gift of stories, what do we do with that in this journey as Catholics or fellow pilgrims in this journey on a time here on earth? So I'll start off with the reality, and then this is life today. It's a very, very frequent and common scene. Although this is probably in Japan, if you go into the MRT, you could probably see a very similar situation, people bending down, looking at their smart devices, being very engrossed about looking into their devices. And it is only because they are trying to fill their time, isn't it? I'm not sure about you, but sometimes there will be this awkward silence in between conversations, and you're trying to fill it in with something. Otherwise, there's that very great discomfort. And what happens here is really we have taken all our mental capacities to be consumed in something which is distracting and is actually putting us onto some form of addiction. Our world today uses these platforms very smartly. If you look into your devices, for myself, I like DIY, right? And for some reason, because of my searches or whatever, Facebook or Instagram starts telling me all those DIY things, and it captures my attention. Next thing you know, I spent an hour looking at those DIY things. We can talk about the same thing about games. You use it as a time filler because it's so enjoyable. Because virtually you're trying to level up your characters, and you realize that there's no ceiling in this character leveling or the kind of loot that you're going to get. At the end of the day, you're stuck in a spiral of a time sink. He's nodding his head in agreement. So we are soon hooked completely. This disordered form of attachments, classically, you would actually call them in a few ways: power, pleasure, wealth, honor. And this is how the classicists would describe these attachments or disordered attachments, or could be used as the word sin, because these are the things that we replace with of something that is this finite good. We are trying to replace it with God, which is the infinite good. And of course, this leaves us very much dissatisfied. The example of the smart devices is just to show that we, in contemporary terms, can be using the word addiction to represent these 4 areas of sin, these disordered attachments. And after all, we are the sum of our experiences. So this is life. How are we going to pivot this with the realities of how stories can counteract these attachments or disordered attachments to things like devices, time sinks, distractions in the world? So firstly, I need to talk a little bit about landings because it may not be as well known to some of you, but I'm so glad that you're here with us this afternoon. Landings, in short, in Landings International is described as a safe place to tell one story, to discern a place in the church, to find a way home. All right? It has been around since 1979, but in Singapore, it has been on our shores since 2008, and over 500 returning or away Catholics have experienced this process. So this is a little bit about landings. The Paulist fathers, who were communicators back then, realized that there was a big disjoint between the church and the ordinary Catholic like you and me on the ground. And because of this, they thought of a program that could help encourage such communications. And therefore, they borrowed on what they call secular programs or secular addiction recovery programs like AA and then other programs where there was benefits in creating authentic conversations, safe spaces where we feel that we are able to then vocalize our issues, but with a very specific Catholic angle. So it's not secular. The only differentiator there is that there's a Catholic element to it, and how that is done is to look at this from the lens of the faith and also to bring in certain aspects of Catholic themes, be it your baptism, your sacraments, suffering, death, how you overcome them, and reconciliation and healing. So this structured program has certain principles. We believe that everybody can be a storyteller if we allow them the space and allow them this comfort that they could speak. In the most comfortable manner is to speak the truth, right? And to speak most naturally is to tell something that is from your history. So the way that I'm sharing today is hopefully a taste of the comfort in telling a story that is from our experiences. Okay, to understand a little bit about the principles of landings and how we use these stories, we do it in 3 broad ways: conversations, compassionate listening, and then community. Conversations, or more importantly, conversations that are authentic and that may be done in confidence and trust is what's differentiating here. People, you and me, can smell a fake person a mile away. But when a person is genuine and you know that the interest is really about you, you're going to offer the time and space to be honest about your life story or the life circumstance that you're undergoing or the trouble that you have with the faith. Yeah, compassionate listening itself is a key aspect because people today are not heard enough. And if there's a chance to be heard, simple presence, simple listening ear without judgment, without probing, it can be something very powerful because we are trying to encourage a situation where we'll meet you where you are. We'll meet you where you are, allow you to be vulnerable. But the key thing here is that we do not offer solutions or propose or to try to probe and to find out more about your history only because there's a sob story to uncover, but it is to meet a person at their comfort level. Community is because you are not alone and you don't have to face life's troubles alone. Only with community today, we may be strong for you, and tomorrow you may be strong for us. So the overlay of all these principles into the actual work at Landings, I would now just share a little bit. Because knowing those principles are fine and they sound nice and dandy, but how are they really practically being used at the work of Landings? Firstly, at Landings, we always start the initial conversations by building initial trust through coffee conversations. Well, it can be coffee, it can be tea, it can be beers, it doesn't matter. As long as it is a comfort where this initial conversation can be made and these connections are made, it doesn't matter what beverage or what alcoholic drink you're having. But this is pretty much the key part here. When an inquiry comes through our website, comes through our forums or in our social media, very frequently these initial conversations happen over a face-to-face meeting. And this leads into, hopefully, a participation in the 10-week program that we actually run 2 times a year. And a little bit of insight what this program about. The key part, if I will summarize, it is the heart of it is about faith stories. But in order for faith stories to happen, we need to feel comfortable, which is why the coffee talks do start first. We get to know our name to faces and we get to know one another. And usually to increase the amount of intimacy, group sharings are usually in very small groups, 5 to 8 people, usually same gender, but it doesn't have to be in the same age group. So the common thing here would be, for example, we are just men, and we're in the same group, but we have somebody who is as young as 20 or somebody who is 70 years old, but it doesn't matter because the various seasons of life is what makes the sharing rich. And then having stories which are not completely similar, that diversity also helps us to be encouraged. So in the process of landings, in a typical session, in a group setting, we will start off with what we call a check-in. And a check-in is essentially to find out your disposition for that evening. By coming together, how do you feel today? You could say that you had a terrible day and you actually don't feel like speaking. It gives your group an understanding of where you are in that session. And then that leads itself to the storytelling portion. The storytelling portion is done on a round-robin basis, but when you're first new to it, you're not immediately thrown into the deep end. People who have experienced landings before start the process and set the tone and the depth of the stories. And later on, I'll share with you how I personally encountered that, because only with somebody giving the depth of their very genuine and honest story will we feel, I won't say compelled, but I will say encouraged to similarly share as deeply and to explore as thoroughly in our own story writing and own storytelling. And of course, in the run process itself, there will be various Catholic themes explored over the weeks, and these are shared from a very personal basis. So it's not theology, it's not catechism. These themes are there for you to read, for you to respond from an I perspective. So there's no judgment on who is a saint or who is a sinner. It is your response to this, so it is true. But there will also be, at the end of the day, a church's position for you to read up upon and then to explore later, especially if they vary tremendously from your personal opinions. So this is hopefully something that is different that we have been trying and successfully been doing over the years. Okay, the key thing is when we share a gift of a story, we just don't end it there and then so just thank you very much and it's done, right? There's a chance for each and every one to affirm one another. And affirmation, which is a very powerful tool, is here, call it a stroke. And encouragement is to look at aspects of their faith stories which we identify with or resonate with and just tell the sharer that this is it and I thank you for it. And if there's a word of encouragement, share that encouragement. But this is not a advice or counseling session, which is hopefully something that we try to avoid. And ongoing community is where we understand the process of returning has its peaks and troughs. In the valleys we grow, right? Sometimes they say that. In the community you also grow, because at the times when you're feeling that you have fallen off the cliff after a retreat experience or a very heightened experience, you need to keep going. And in community, that's where your brother or sister will be keeping you on the straight and narrow. Today you'll be strong for them and tomorrow they'll be strong for you. You'll be strong for them as well. And community mode, as with most faith communities, are based on 3 aspects. There will be the word, where there will be reflection and sharing. There will be prayer, and of course, there's fellowship. Yeah. So that's enough about landings. How this is made live in my own personal experience is such. I say that returning always begins with a crisis, and it was definitely happened for me that way. Monsignor Heng, some time ago at CGS itself, Cathedral itself, asked me, what was the reason that I left the church? And I went on a full ramble, right, about how I pursued my career, how I had a young family, how I wanted this and that. And then he summarized it, he said, stop. Okay, so what you're saying is that it's secularism, isn't it? And I said, yeah, Monsignor Heng, Father, that is exactly it. It is secularism that took me away from the faith. But it is also today with a crisis that I'm returning. And, for me, my personal crisis, I'll elaborate a little, was a death of a friend at a very young age. In my mind, right, I always think that we have this 26,000 days to burn, all right? Assumption of an average life. And I would want, therefore, to grind these days so well and use them so well that I ensure that all material needs, all fundamental needs, all cares for the families are all sorted. And then I'll make good with God, right? I'll sort it all out at the end of life. And that was my assumption. I know it sounds very juvenile, but I truly believe that. But when my friend passed away at 30 years old, that challenged this assumption because maybe my mind was so caught up with this sense of transaction, that faith is like a transaction. She was a faithful Catholic, a person who was very in touch with her faith. She shared that around with the people around her, and she was a good person. So why did she have a multiple stroke that resulted in her death just when she had an 8-month-old child? For me, that blew my mind away because her death didn't hit me as hard as the consequence of what it meant. It meant that my assumptions were all wrong. And that brought me into a terrible crisis because there was a dread in my soul. If I were to die tomorrow, what would I have to show for in this journey of faith? I think I would face God with a very bad report card. And that was the fear that filled my heart. But yet at the same time, I was struggling with a young family. I had, at that point, 2 very young children, 1 year after another. And to be honest, I was not ready to be a father. Not being ready to be a father meant that I tried to find things that I could pour myself to take my time away legitimately away from the children. It could be work. And after work, it could be gaming. And I thought gaming was the most harmless thing that I could indulge myself into because there are much harder vices that I could think about. But this gaming that took me away from my children resulted in an addiction, I realize now, because it became an hour, it became 2 hours, it became 3 hours, it became 8 hours of gaming a day, which meant that after a night of no sleeping due to gaming, I'll go to work the next day totally grumpy. And when I come home, I'm so totally exhausted that I take it out on the family, the people that I love, by being angry, by being short, by being a totally demonized individual. So it started with this crisis, and it reached to a point of a breakdown because my wife at that point in time was giving me an ultimatum and saying, I'm going to throw your computer out the window, and then you have to do something about it because I realized that you need help, and I do need help. And the first thing that I wanted to turn to was the faith of my youth. So I wanted to explore the Catholic faith again because it is beyond my human ability to solve this life crisis. So I just want to turn to the divine. And when I called all my Catholic youth friends from yesteryears, they had left the church. It was terrible. They have left the church. And then the few that I don't want to be associated with somehow remain faithful. And these were the ones that welcomed me. This is not the bench that I was welcomed back. I was welcomed back at a bench outside the Church of the Holy Spirit, wooden bench, over a face-to-face conversation where the individual just offered a simple listening ear. And that's where I first tasted compassionate listening without judgment, and I was able to share that I wanted to return. Okay, when God ran, I quote from Luke chapter 15:20, when he was still a long way off, The father caught sight of him and he was filled with compassion. He ran to the son and embraced him and kissed him. Why this is so important is because it is very pivotal in the heart of Landings. We believe that at Landings, we will be like that father, waiting, looking for that speck in the horizon, and then start running. That was exactly what this friend did for me at that bench, right? When I said I wanted to return, he came running. And that was the powerful attitude that I saw at Landings, because this simple act opened the doors and facilitated the process of reconciliation, forgiveness, and restoration. You know, Luke chapter 15 itself has a long preamble. It starts off with the lost coin, and it talks of the lost sheep, and then the lost son, or the parable of the prodigal son. But each of these focuses on the point that the things that were lost were of great personal value, you know. I have a $10 here, so just imagine this $10 here is $10,000, yeah. Even if I crush it, it is soiled, okay, and it's totally ruined, right, and muddied. If I put it on the street and someone recognizes it is $10,000, do you think they'll pick it up? Of course they will, right? But in this case here, just metaphorically, imagine this $10,000 is recognized in you, in you, in you, and in you. And God picks it up, dusts it out, straightens it out, and restores it, right, to its nice, pristine $10, which I'm going to keep back in my wallet. Yeah. Which is something pivotal in the storytelling process. You know, when I went through the process of Landings, all I wanted to was to find a solution to this looming death and purpose in my life. That's all I wanted, and I had too much pride to acknowledge that I was an away Catholic. I refused that label, and I asked the people then not to call me that, and to just allow me to enjoy the process and get my solutions and walk out of the door. But when the first facilitators shared their stories, I recognized something, that they had dug in so deep in their lives, that they shared such intimate encounters that required me to respond. Because I've experienced the depth of stories that even my family members have never even told me. I've not heard that from my father or mother or my sister. But yet, in this stranger came a story so powerful that compelled me, that really encouraged me to explore. And that's exactly what I did. I resolved to do a good story. And that preparation included a lot of reflection, going back as far as I could in my memories of encounters of the faith. Why did I leave? Why do I feel abandoned, hurt, and destroyed? And what do I plan to do now with this storytelling? This uncovered this process of reflection and eventually writing it down allowed me to identify and uncover hurts that were swept so deeply under the carpet that reopening them could be very painful, but it also gave me a realization that the situation I faced were deeper than I thought. They had some very fundamental relationships that had to be healed, whether it's with my parents or with my family, that has also affected the way I became as a father. And finally, when I vocalized the story, there was such tremendous relief because it was a burden. By finally saying that I had a problem, that I had an addiction, that I had a broken relationship, allowed me to commence in this process of healing. And that was the power of storytelling. You know, it's not rocket science, but there's a lot of hard work that is involved. And therefore, I would encourage you to do that, even if it's not through Landings, but through the process of trying to write a faith story. Through these stories and eventually in the retreat process, I encountered personally the love of God through the people around me and their stories, which gave me a great encouragement to finally do the sacraments, the reconciliation, and the Eucharist the first time in a good state of grace. So when we go far, we go together, right? I mean, you know, life doesn't have to change dramatically, and it didn't for me after the encounter of Landings or a personal encounter with Christ. But what it did was it gave me a tremendous resolve to stay faithful to stay grounded, to stay aligned with God and what He has designed for me and His purposes for me, rather than for my selfish interests. I start seeing the value of trying to prioritize the good of others before mine. And that was the power of it. Community life thereafter kept me on the straight and narrow. Yeah, it gives me a lot of encouragement, and I quote that little African proverb there that you want to travel fast, you travel alone, but you want to travel far, you travel together, you travel as a community. So that is in a nutshell what Landings is all about. What you could do here is spread the word. We all know someone who is away. We all know someone who is struggling with the faith. We are also, in this week today, we are actually at Cana. So if you have, if you'd like to visit the booth, you're welcome. If not, check out our website at www.landings.org.sg. Immediately, there are a couple of stories and there's an inquiry form. So please encourage your friend, especially in the season of Advent, this springtime, yeah, to start looking at ways that we can encourage others back to the faith. So I'll plant a couple of questions because these are typical FAQs, but I'm also happy to hear yours as well. How do inquiries come in? Can I register for someone on behalf of someone else? To be honest, the reconnection impulse must first come from the individual themselves. Although parents or friends want to encourage another and try to let them try to register them to Landings itself and hoping that we have a conversation, it can actually work the other way around. We do hope, though, that if you feel you resonate enough with storytelling, take a chance to meet your friends for this coffee talk itself and share your own stories, and then make a recommendation or referral to us. We'll be happy to reconnect with them as well. And how do I evangelize with stories? I had the privilege of your attention for this short time we have together, 30, 40 minutes. But the ability to then condense your own faith story to 2 minutes to 3 minutes is your power of evangelization. And then in a particular, I would say, conference that was done a couple of years back, I think it was the Office of New Evangelization, that was precisely the exercise that they encouraged, to be able to succinctly tell your story in a taxi ride. Imagine you have a taxi ride and you only have that time. What will you share in order to authentically connect with the listener? So this is the power of the stories. This is the gift. And I'm quite sure all of you have the power that resides within you. So share it on and evangelize with your stories as well. God bless. This is our motto, always returning, because we will always fall at some point, but we should always have the resolve to pick ourselves up and come back again to God. Thank you.